Church in Thibodaux, Louisiana welcomes you to our celebration of the 19th Sunday of Ordinary Time, Sunday, August the 9th, 2015. This is Father Mark, and today we're going to talk about the summer and lots of conversations that we've all had this summer, questions about God and religion, and is Jesus really who he says he is? I told you a little bit about my summer last weekend, and perhaps one of the best parts of the entire summer for me was just actually the ride home. I love road trips. Love being in a car with people and having conversation, nothing to do except just enjoy the open road and scenery and just each other. And I think it's one of those things that goes back to my childhood. You know, I grew up the number 5 of 6, and we drive to Percy Quin, Mississippi, or Bay St. Louis, or LSU football games, and we had the big orange van when I was a kid, and we'd all pile in there together. And we do everything from laughing with each other to picking on each other to fighting with each other and everything in between. And I think from just an early age, I really came to appreciate the art of conversation. And I think that's one of those things that we're kind of losing. We're losing the art of conversation. And so when you find people who really appreciate just a good conversation, they're just fun to be around. And road trips are the perfect place for that. So I actually have a buddy of mine who enjoys road trips just as much as I do and loves conversation just as much as I do. And I was lucky enough to actually have him for the second time drive to Omaha just so that we could drive back together. And it was a phenomenal trip, one of the highlights of my entire summer. Took some pilgrimage stops on the way home at the Anheuser-Busch Place in St. Louis, and of course stopped at Graceland in Memphis and on the way home. And everything in between and those stops along the way just gave us an opportunity just to talk to each other, and it was great. Loved having conversation about the serious things in life, and loved having conversation about the silly things, relevant things, irrelevant things, and I think I appreciated most when the conversations got deep, and I dare say even sometimes when we differed with each other, you know. And it's in those conversations when you can actually talk to a person about life issues that metal sharpens metal, you might say. Conversation sharpens conversation. I think we've just kind of lost that ability. I think we've lost not only the art of conversation, but it just seems like whenever emotion enters into the equation that people don't know how to talk to each other anymore. You know, whenever an emotional or a heated topic comes up, we've lost the ability to reason and converse our way through the topic from an intellectual perspective, because it's just all now governed by emotion. I remember distinctly, even when I was a kid, you know, I loved whenever our family got together, both sides of my family. They were great. And you know, every once in a while when I was a kid, you know, you're just with a lot of different people. You know, somebody would just kind of make more of a racist or a bigoted comment, kind of dropping the N-word, you know. And I remember as a kid just being really sad. I remember telling one of my cousins or my mom or somebody when I was a kid that I felt like my heart was crying every time I hear a racial slur against people of color. And I remember distinctly, I think I was 15 years old, and it was at a big family gathering, and I was kind of one-on-one with the person, and they kind of went into their rant or into their opinionated emotion about people of color. And I remember I just kind of came out, God, and I was emotional, and they were emotional, and I was heated, and they were heated, and the conversation didn't end well, and it was distinct memory. So I remember the next year, as that particular family gathering was approaching, that I remember I didn't want to go down that road again, but I knew that this particular person was going to probably make the same comment. And so sure enough, we were together, and sure enough, words came out of his mouth that were racist, and so I tried to just respond with reason, to kind of ask him questions like, hey, do you really believe that? And, you know, and try to sift in through the conversation, you might say, more intellectually, like a healthy intellect, you know, just kind of, hey, let's talk about this. And it just went equally as sour as the previous year. You know, it got nasty, and they were all about emotion and this and that. And I remember just walking away with a real grief in my heart. And even at the age of 16, realizing that we have lost the art of conversation, especially when you get into the more controversial things of life, or when emotion is involved in it all. I got to bring all that up today because, now that I'm back home, I'm quite sure that your summer is very much like my summer, and I've had lots of conversations in the past month about religion, about God, about government, about gay marriage and straight marriage, and Planned Parenthood and everything in between. And I'm not necessarily going to kind of go there today, just to kind of set your heart at ease for a second. But I think in the midst of it all, I have been grieved most by the fact that we don't know how to talk about it, because just because somebody knows somebody who's gay, we can't even have a conversation about the topic. Or just because somebody knows somebody who had an abortion, like you can't even have the conversation. Or just because somebody is contraception, like you can't even have the conversation. Like whatever the hot issue is, and there's I'm sure a dozen of them. I think what I have tasted in the last several weeks, at least in my life, is that we've just lost the ability to have conversation with each other. And like if you've been there, if you've had those conversations with people also, then my heart goes out to you. And maybe today we can kind of inch into things together, because it's real. And it really challenges us today. Like, do we know, independent of the emotion, like how to speak to each other? Let me give you an example. I was at dinner this summer, and shortly after the Supreme Court ruling came out, and had an opportunity to be with some people in my life who I have recently come to really appreciate, and not only was I with them who I knew, but I was with some people that I was meeting that night for the first time. And, let's just say, younger adults under 40. And, it seems like right when we got into dinner, this was 2 days after the Supreme Court ruling on gay marriage, like the question came right across the table. So Father Mark, what do you think about gay marriage? And I remember just kind of like being surprised by the immediacy of the question, or the direct nature of the question. And I think just in my surprise, I just kind of shot back a question to him, like, well, tell me what you think. And it was interesting that night. Like I didn't really do a whole lot of teaching or preaching, or I found myself led to asking a lot of questions, and just really was fascinated with the way that he was thinking, knowing that his thoughts drive his opinions drive his words, and I was just trying my best to understand where is the secular American mind coming from, and not to judge him, but just trying to understand him, And so I asked a lot of questions that night, and here's the important part of the conversation. We were talking, and he said, and I quote, the church exists to help people. So I wish the church would get out of the political process. Let me say that again. The church exists to help people. So I wish the church would get out of the political process. So I asked him, I said, well, is that why the church exists? Does the church exist to help people? And his response was yes. And I think my response was something like, well, if the church exists to help people, then what's the difference between the church and the Red Cross? And I don't remember him really having an answer for that. And I think I may have thought or said something to the fact of, well, you answer that question, and then I'll tell you how I feel about gay marriage. Because, I think that we've lost our ability to think even about God. And I think our culture is so much more influenced by the History Channel or by television than it is by the Bible. And at the heart of today's gospel is It's a pretty important question, which is, do you and I believe that Jesus is who he says he is? Bishop Robert Barron has a great little a piece in the first episode of his Catholicism series where he's really just trying to drive in that point home of, do we believe Jesus is who he says he is? Because Jesus he's unlike any religious leader. You know, if you look at all of the religious leaders, Bishop Barron says, you know, you take Muhammad. Muhammad would never draw attention intentionally to himself. Muhammad would always talk about the revelation that was given to him. Or, you know, Buddha would never draw attention to himself. He would always say that here's a path of life. You know, Confucius or Judaism or, you know, all of those religions, they don't necessarily draw attention to a particular person. It's all about a way of living. It's a path. It's a set of values for a life. But Christianity is something radically different. Because Jesus, he makes some pretty bold assumptions. And as Bishop Barron says, Jesus is either a dangerous lunatic or he's the Messiah. But there's no two ways about it. I mean, it's black and white here. Either he is who he says he is or he's not. And let me tell you, if Jesus is not who he says he is, he's claiming to be God, then he's a lunatic for thinking that, but he's also like dangerously irresponsible for leading people down the path of believing that, even to some of their deaths, if he's not who he says he is. Because over and over and over, Jesus is always asking people, do you believe that I am who I say I am? Do you believe that I am God? What's the question in Matthew 16 on Caesarea Philippi when Jesus has the apostles there and, you know, they've been out and about preaching? He says to Peter, of course, you know the question, who do people say that I am? Jesus isn't asking Peter, hey, what do people think about my teaching? Or are they getting their way of life? Or what are they thinking about the values that I'm putting out there? Or what do they think about my political agenda? Jesus is not interested in what people are hearing necessarily as he is. Do they believe who they're hearing it from? He's intentionally asking Peter, who do people say that I am? Today's gospel, John chapter 6. We are this week in the third of 4 weeks moving through John chapter 6. And today, just listen to the number of times and to the language that Jesus uses. You know, he says, no one can come to me unless the Father draw him. No one can go to the Father unless they come through me. I will raise him on the last day. No one has seen the Father except me. Whoever believes in me has eternal life. I am the bread of life. I am the living bread. I will give my flesh for the life of the world. Like over and over and over, like 7 times in today's gospel, just from at Mass today, Jesus is talking about himself. He's intentionally drawing the attention to his identity as God. The question is Jesus who he says he is? Jesus is saying that he's God over and over and over and over and over again. That seems to be the central message that he is driving home in the hearts of the apostles. You see, Jesus is trying to remind us that Christianity is about a person, him. And what has happened in our culture is we have depersonalized Christianity. In other words, what we've done is we've taken Christianity out of the person of Jesus Christ, or even through a very dangerous, historical, critical, kind of dry, studying Jesus as a literary figure almost. We have stripped Jesus of his humanity. And that's out there, and let's just be honest, you and I are more influenced by television. We think what's on TV is true, and so we mistake truth in television, and therefore we have depersonalized Christianity, and what Christianity has become is another way of living. It's a path. It's about love, right? It's about feeding the poor and being nice to your neighbor and about love, and that's what the world wants us to think. And so what happens is now we simply line up Christianity right on the side of Judaism or Islam or Hindu or Buddha or any other religious figures or spirituality without religion, whatever that is. And what we do is we just look at all of these paths, and then what we do is we try to find common elements, and people say, well, the common theme amongst all religions is love and neighbor and things like that. And so then you get into conversations with people about religions during the summer, and they say things like, well, Catholic Church makes it too complicated, or it all boils down to love. And let me just be honest with you. I said this with great reverence, but with like a father's love. Like, to say that all religions are the same, that's just intellectually sloppy. And in fact, I would say that's actually not intellectual at all. That's actually just ignorant. In philosophy, there's something called the principle of non-contradiction, which says that something can't be true and not true all at the same time. What does that mean? It means you can't say that gravity exists and yet gravity doesn't exist all at the same time. That would be untrue. Right? So either gravity exists or it doesn't. And of course, as I'm on the earth right now, we all know that gravity does exist. But something can't be not true and true. Something can't be true or not true all at the same time. It can't contradict itself. There's no contradiction in truth. So Jesus, who says he's God, can't be compared to any other world religion which overtly says that Jesus is not God. So you see, it's either true or it's not. There can't be contradiction. So you can't say that all religions are just different ways of getting to the same God, because Christianity is the only religion that actually makes a claim that there is only one God, and his name is Jesus. And yet it's out there. It's all over. It's in our conversations with people. And my question to us today is, do you believe that Jesus is who he says he is? Because if Jesus is the Son of God, if Jesus is the Messiah, if Jesus Christ is God, then there's only one response, and that's surrender. Because if Jesus Christ is God, then that means I'm not. And that means you're not. And for you and I to admit that Jesus is God and we're not, and for us not to surrender, would either be utter blasphemy or just evidence that we don't really understand what we're saying. Do you believe that he is who he says he is? Because if you do, if we do, if I do, then all of my opinions about what I want to believe or not believe need to be brought into the light of what he says. In other words, if Jesus is who he says he is, then how do his words shape my opinions about things? And you see, this is where it gets difficult, you see, because what I found this summer is, let's just take gay marriage or same-sex attraction for an example. You know, we all know people who are gay, and whenever we press in intellectually with great reason about what the Bible says about it, then it's easy just to check out and flight and say, well, I know somebody who's gay, so that must be wrong. Well, is Jesus who he says he is? Because if he is, then our questions about the hot topics, they need to be passed through him rather than emotion, and that's what happens all the time. See, so not only have we lost the ability to talk to each other, but I think we've lost the ability to talk to God. about the tough stuff. So, like, you might have questions about church teaching, you might have questions about gay marriage, or you might have questions about Planned Parenthood, or you might have questions about, what is the church going to do about X, Y, Z, or how can the church teach that? Having questions is not a bad thing. Actually, having questions could be a sign that God's moving you in a certain depth, but it's what you do with the questions, you see. That's where I really want to encourage you today. If you have questions, and I think in my experience, one of three things happens. Number one, a lot of times we have questions about church teaching or religious teachings, and then we don't know the answer. And then we get into a conversation with somebody, and they seem pretty convicted, very emotional about what they think. And because we don't know how to respond to them, we kind of cave back into our emotions clash with emotions, and then somebody will say something like, well, that's what you believe, and I believe what I believe, and what's true to you is true to you, what's true to me is true to me, and which is essentially saying, let's just give up because we can't talk. So the first thing that happens is you have questions, but you don't know what the answers are. Secondly, you have questions, and you've already formed your opinion about the answer to the question. And more than likely, and myself included, our answers to those hotly contested questions are more filled with half-truths or partial answers than they are the full light of the gospel in Jesus Christ. And so we have built within us a structure of half-truths which form our opinions, and then we heard something on the news and that kind of forms it in there, and we love people and don't want to offend them, so that all kind of factors in. So our opinions are actually kind of like this this melding together of kind of knowing a little bit of something and misinformation from the media and emotion in relationships, and that's what forms our opinion. And so sometimes when we have questions, we actually are afraid of letting go of our opinions because of the implications of all that. So option A, you have questions and you don't know the answers. Option 2, you have questions but you're afraid to let go of your opinion. Or option 3, you have questions and you press into it. Now look, I'm going fishing today, and I don't know a whole lot about fishing, but I have questions about fishing, and I'm going to do the best I can to learn. But the questions I have about fishing and the questions that I have about God, like only one set of those questions is going to impact my eternal salvation. So it does me well to invest a little more time with my questions about religion or God than it does about fishing. So option 3, you might have questions and you might actually invest time into learning more about God. So I'm going to offer you 2 words of encouragement today, maybe just to kind of help you along the way. Next weekend, we are going to continue to press into the Bread of Life Discourse, John chapter 6 in the readings. But next Sunday, August the 16th, we're also going to, in the second reading at Mass, begin Ephesians chapter 5, which, right after the Gospel of Mark is probably the clearest biblical argument for a male and a female being married. And so next weekend's readings are about marriage. And I'll be honest with you right now, I'm not going to go there. Where I'm going to go next weekend is I'm going to talk about love. Because I've heard that a lot this summer. Why can't we let 2 men or 2 women get married? Why don't you just let them love each other? Or why does the Catholic Church have to judge people? Why can't it just love one another? Or marriage is about love, or the church ought to tell people about love, or there's just been a lot of use of the word love, including the front page of papers the day after the Supreme Court ruling that love wins. And so I really think that it would probably kind of serve us better if we just unpacked what love is. And I'll be honest with you, I don't care what the media says or what the government says. The authority on love is love himself, and that's God. So what we're going to do next week is we're going to talk about love through the lens of Jesus Christ, who is who he says he is. And so if it would be helpful for you to be a part of our conversation next week, then we certainly welcome you to our family at Christ the Redeemer. You actually might have been in conversation with some people this past summer, and the conversation kind of ended because of a heated conversation about love. And so, hey, why don't you bring them to Mass with you next week? I think it's going to be a great conversation. I'm just going to toss out some questions, and we're just going to walk through it together. So, just join us next week, August the 16th, as we talk about love. I also want to let you know that many of you, just after 7:30 Mass today and 9:30 Mass, have asked if it would be possible for me to, outside of Mass, take some time to just explain what does the church teach about marriage or same-sex attraction or about Planned Parenthood or about, like, there are a number of issues that, I think we just don't have time at Mass to give you a clear, coherent explanation of church teaching. And so we are going to do that. I'm going to look at my calendar and put some things together. So we're in this together, and I love you. And I just give you a question today, which is, do you believe that Jesus Christ is who he says he is? Because that is really the most important of any question that we might ask as we move forward. So let's grapple with it. Let's ask it together. Let's press into our hearts. Is Jesus who he says he is? God bless you.